For more on the issue of security as it relates to Iran, we have reached Mark Dubowitz. He's the CEO of the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, a Washington-based nonpartisan policy institute. He's also an expert on the Iranian nuclear program and its global threat network. Mark, good to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Natasha.
Mark, can we please begin with this reporting from our colleague Ashley Burke about the Iranian regime or Iranian operatives issuing credible death threats to Canadian citizens? Is this a real threat? What do you make of the reporting?
It's absolutely real, and it's certainly another example in a long line of threats that the regime has issued against Iranian dissidents around the world, against U.S. officials and former officials. In fact, my think tank has also been designated by Iran, and my colleagues and I have been threatened. So this is real, and everybody should take this very, very seriously in Canada and around the world.
Is the international community taking this seriously enough, in your estimation?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think they're taking the threat to innocent Iranian dissidents around the world seriously enough, because I think if they were, what they would do is they would expel Iranian ambassadors from key capitals in Europe. Because remember, every embassy that Iran has in Europe is staffed not by diplomats, but by Iranian intelligence officials who use that embassy to monitor Iranian dissidents around the world. So instead of sending the Scotland Yard, for example, in London today to protect an Iranian media outlet, they should be expelling the Iranian ambassador and his intelligence officials from London and elsewhere in Europe.
Our colleague Rosemary Barton, I just want to give the crew upstairs a bit of a heads up. Let's play a clip for Mark. So our colleague Rosemary Barton spoke with the U.S. envoy to Iran earlier today about how perhaps the United States should approach what's going on in Iran, and here's what he had to say. Let's take a listen.
Our policy is not one of regime change. I know that the Iranian regime likes to say that that's what we're doing, that's what others are doing. As I said earlier, what's happening in Iran will be decided by the people of Iran.
So, Mark, I wonder if I could get your reaction to that, because it is sort of a hands-off approach. Hey, we don't want regime change. Whatever you guys want to do, we'll just go with it. What do you make of those comments?
Well, I think they're unfortunate because, Iranians are in the streets yelling death to the dictator in support of regime change. And Mr. Malley, who's the Iran envoy for the U.S. State Department, is making it clear that he is not in support of that policy that Iranians support. So instead, Mr. Malley is committed to going back into this 2015 nuclear deal that would give the regime in Iran $1 trillion in sanctions relief in exchange for restrictions that are going to go away over a few years. In contrast, President Biden actually has made it clear that he supports the United States freeing Iran. Unfortunately, his senior aides like Mr. Malley seem to not be complying with the president's wishes.
For many who are watching from the outside, Mark, there seems to be a disconnect. When you talk about a security threat like what Russia is doing to Ukraine, NATO is galvanizing, sending money, sending aid, sending weapons, and yet we're having this internal battle take place within Iran, and the Western world, NATO, the UN, is not really responding in the same sort of way. Why not?
It's exactly right. I don't know why not. I mean, the Islamic Republic of Iran represents a significant threat to international security. Certainly building nuclear weapons, missiles, including intercontinental ballistic missiles to threaten the United States and hold our cities hostage. Long-range missiles that threaten European cities, supporting terrorism in the Middle East, in Europe, around the world, threatening, as I said, innocent Iranians and others. And you would think this would galvanize international support, and yet, besides some rhetorical statements and some perfunctory sanctions, it's done very little. The other thing to remember is that the regime in Iran is supporting Putin to kill Ukrainian women and children, while the supreme leader of Iran kills Iranian women and children. And so these two conflicts have intersected in a fundamental way, and yet we've still seen very little response from both Washington and Europe in taking the steps necessary to hold this regime accountable.
What would be the necessary steps, aside from telling the ambassadors to go home?
Well, first of all, a declarative policy that we support the Iranian people to bring down this regime. Second is we support setting up a labor strike fund so that Iranians who are going on strike, who are not only risking their their lives, but are also not being able to be paid while they're on strike, could get support. And that's be something that would be easy to set up and easy to get that money into the hands of free labor unions in Iran that are trying to support these people. We could provide information about the whereabouts of the security services and use our cyber tools to blind their surveillance capabilities. We could release the names and addresses of the security services, make it clear and name and shame them so that Iranians can take those matters into their own hands. We could go and precipitate an even greater currency crisis so that the regime doesn't have the foreign exchange reserves it needs in order to support its security establishment and pay its security services. There are really countless other ideas we don't have time to talk about, Natasha, but this requires a commitment by the United States, by Canada, and by Europe to do everything possible to support the Iranian people in their desire to free Iran. Again, we've seen an amazing reaction from the West in galvanizing a reaction against Vladimir Putin. And yet, as you point out, we've seen very little in support of the Iranian people.
Before I let you go, Mark, this has been very helpful, and we've compared the situation in Iran in terms of the response to it to how people have responded to Ukraine. I wonder if I could offer another comparison, which is Syria. A long, ongoing, often ignored civil war on the ground. Is it possible that Iran is on that same trajectory and that the West will continue to just watch from a distance?
Yeah, I don't think Iran is heading to civil war. I think what we're looking at is, millions of Iranians who've come to the streets and have said enough, right? We're sick of living under this kind of tyranny, and we want a representative government that gives us opportunity for freedom and prosperity. We should support that. I think if we don't support that, unfortunately, I think the regime is going to turn its security services in a lethal way, as it is doing today, actually, in parts of Iran, against these poor people, gunned down thousands of people already. Hundreds have been killed, 58 children. And I'm afraid those numbers are going to climb as the world remains silent and indifferent.
Mark Dubowitz, thank you so much for your time and for your insights.
Thanks so much, Natasha.